Alisa is a program head of the PR. Yes, sorry, you're the program head of the PR session. You're also an associate professor of public relations at Ohio Northern University. Dr. Agozzino teaches a variety of classes, including Introduction to PR, Public Relations Writing, Principles of Social Media, Public Relations Research, and Public Relations Campaigns. From nonprofit to professional sports teams to public relations professionals, Dr. Agozzino is exploring how those using social media tools are doing so to effectively reach their target audiences in order to build and maintain mutually beneficial relationships. In addition to the Ohio Northern University's PRSSA advisor, Alisa serves as the National PRSSA faculty advisor, board member of the Central Ohio PRSA, and the past chairs of the National PRSA Educators Academy section. Dr. Agozzino is also a recent co-editor of Stu Kent's newest PR principles text. And so we'll be putting some links into the chat for those who are entering. I'll also add in the bio that I just read in case anyone's interested in seeing that. But we'll turn over the time to Alisa, and be sure to use the chat to give us any comments or questions you have. At the end, we will take those questions and we'll ask them to Alisa so we can get them answered for you. But with that, I give you Alisa.
Yay, thank you. It's always funny when they all read all the fun things about yourself and you're like, oh, really? Did I do that? Is that really me? It's so nice to be here. I love ProfCon. I love hanging out here and speaking with you all today. So thanks for inviting me back. Yes, I did write my first textbook, and it was with Stu Kent. I have a co-author, Jamie Ward, who unfortunately, her daughter had a freak trampoline accident and shattered her ankle and now has like 7 screws in it. That happened yesterday. So she's not with me today, but this is part of the strategy part of our PR text. And we came up with this model, the P.A.C.E model, of kind of just a way for students to understand how to build strategy. Because I think as professors, it's one of our toughest things to task students with, because it's really easy to talk about and we understand it because many of us have been doing it for so long, either practicing it or teaching it, or both, in many cases both. But how to actually do it and explain it and teach it to someone else can be tough. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, is using that P.A.C.E model, like P.A.C.E. I also, just some background, ran track and field collegiately and was pretty decent at it. So I have that sports mentality. And so the P.A.C.E model, meaning pacing yourself in sports, a lot of times in track, we talked about pacing yourself. Don't burn out at the beginning of the race. You got to keep your pace. So hence the P.A.C.E model being that reference. It's not a sprint, because it's not, as any of you who have implemented any type of strategy into a campaign, you want it to be sometimes a sprint and be over with, but it's something that constantly morphs and has to morph and constantly is changing and changing shapes, and just culturally how that impacts it, and how students need to figure that out. And what our job as professors or instructors is how to lead them to get to that. So that's kind of how I set up today's webinar presentation for you all. And hopefully this makes sense. I incorporated a little bit, of course, into the text, but not so much that if you never have to teach a strategy PR specifically class, that you couldn't use some of these takeaways from today. So even in we just recently at Ohio Northern, our public relations program used to be in the communication and journalism program. And 2 years ago, it moved to the business college. And that was my doing, my pitching to our college, saying, I really think the way public relations is moving is it's morphing with social media specifically. And I teach or started a social media minor at our private university. And so I had that kind of tagged with the PR, and we had a lot of marketing, advertising, graphic design crossover into the PR social media strategy minor. So in doing so, when we moved over to business, one of our capstone class is a real client class that they take a strategies class first, one semester strategies class, and then a whole year they do the actual client-based work with the client. And so I think sometimes this could be my presentation today, in other words, even though it has a PR lean to it, it could definitely fit into most classes that have to teach that strategy portion. So I know that today is not super interactive just in how it's built, but how do you guys teach strategy? Most of you do it through some type of campaigns class or client-based activity class where the students are getting that strategy firsthand, right? They get to experience it. And that's what this presentation today is coming from, because all of the classes that I teach strategy in, that's how it's done, where you're actually getting a client, and instead of getting paid, you're getting a grade. But where are they at when they get this class, and how much do they know, and how much do we assume that they know coming in here to pull off this campaign? And so hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll have some takeaways of using that PACE model, both from the student perspective, but also from the professor perspective, and how to teach those tools and techniques into your classes with that PACE model guiding you. So what do students need prior to this point? Well, I'm going under the understanding that our students have already had some research-based class. For us, it could be marketing research, or we have communications research, we have institutional research. There's a whole major in research, right? So I'm coming in the understanding that the way our curriculum is set, they have to have that understanding of research and a research methods class before they get to the strategy-based classes. And that's because even if we talk about in public relations, we call it the RPA model, and that stands for research, planning, implementing the campaign, and then evaluating the campaign. So even if in the PR world, they've had that research portion before they get to the planning portion, which is the strategy, where they're building out their strategy. And so because that naturally follows that research stage and having some understanding there, I'm going under the assumption that they've had that research portion. So they do understand that. And also, if you can build in time on the front end of the process, and I've found this to be so incredibly helpful. And as we walk through that PACE model, you'll see more why that this makes sense. But if you can build that front end of the process and the planning stage, in the planning stage, it can result the most fruitful results because they have time to adjust, and they have time to pivot, and they have time to change and evaluate and educate themselves in places that they don't understand yet. So I try to front load my classes, but I also try to front load projects so that when they're walking through these processes, that they kind of have that understanding that if something does need to change, that they're not freaking out that it's not done. And the same with doing a strategy for a client. If something's not working, it gives you a little time to adjust. All right, so without further ado, let's go into the PACE model. So the first one, the P stands for prioritizing. And I think once you review the research, right, in many of our client-based classes, and the capstone's different from my campaigns courses, but the students have that understanding of what the client has pitched to them, or what their understanding of the client is. And that's, the first, in my campaigns class, I make the client come pitch to the students. And this goes actually more to the A, which is a test, but I make the students have buy-in to whatever. Usually I have two, if I have a bigger class and I have time enough for 2 or 3 teams, I'll have different clients that they kind of have to buy into what client they would like to work on. And so once they've reviewed that research, and then they have to kind of prioritize what's essential to keep and continuing to develop that plan. And we're not going to go through the entire plan, but the chapter certainly does in the textbook, but we're focusing on that strategy part. But you have to prioritize what is absolutely needed at the end of this semester, in our case for those students, or in the year-long capstone project, it's an entire year, but still, what's needed at the end of the year? What do the clients want to walk away with? And we have to prioritize that. That has to be our top priority, because as we all know, but the students sometimes don't understand, is they get hung up on details, right? They're planning an event and all their eggs are in the event basket, and then it's, in Ohio, it snows, and then, you know, no one comes to your event because there's 3 feet of snow and nobody can drive there. So they get so hung up on details or meaningless tasks that drain that momentum, and then they're done, right? So how can we adjust and make sure that we're prioritizing what needs to be done as much as you can, involving the planning teams, or in some cases the groups of students, is best. And this is what I'm talking about when I say buy-in, because as much as they can be excited about something, right? Whatever one they're most excited about, I want them to be part of that. And then as much as they can help set those that strategy, those goals and objectives for that client, I want them to be part of that process as much as possible. And then once that's set, make sure they have a clear plan in which they're motivated and energized to implement. And that's part of that buy-in. So that's why I ask, you know, which one excites you most, and rank these in importance. And I really try hard to make sure that don't rank them based on what your best friend in the class is ranking them on. What really, where do you see yourself afterwards? Or would this add to, you know, whatever industry you want to go into from this class after graduation? So from the student perspective, this prioritizing, we all know that they have multiple classes, they have extracurricular things, they have jobs on top of these client-based projects. And I know sometimes I get lost in, like, why aren't they connecting to that client? Why aren't they reaching out? Why aren't they doing like, you need to devote some time here. But I lose that perspective from the student side of, I have 6 other classes that I'm attending, and I have all these other responsibilities that I'm attending to. So you know, this isn't my full-time job. I don't have 8 hours to devote to it as if it were a real public relations campaign or whatever it might be. So I have to keep that, and in doing that, so that will help them prioritize what's important, which is why you have to know what's most important part of this project. And as we all know, and why you may or may not implement group projects, they're not always, you know, a walk into the park. People are not always excited to jump in there, or you have your A-type student that's like, let me do the whole thing because all of you will mess this up. So we don't want that either. We want everyone to be part of that process. And I think when they prioritize and they kind of come to a conclusion based as a group, you know, this could help prioritize what parts are most important and where my expertise is and where I can lend most help to the group. The timeline, it always takes more time than what they think it will take, right? They're going to plan out an event and they leave, you know, 2 days for the speakers to get back to them to see if they can speak. And then they're like, wow, it's been a week and nobody's responded, or, you know, one person's responded. You can't give them 2 days and an ultimatum of why you want them to speak for usually a hug and a mug at your event. Like, you got to give them more time. So that timeline always takes more time than they think. So they have to prioritize what's the most important parts. And again, front loading that is super important. And there's always that disconnect between client expectations and student expectations. So we work really hard from the beginning to, again, involve as much as your team as you can once they're selected to work with that client. But the client expectations, we're pretty clear on, you know, it's great that you want us to build your website and totally run your social media and, you know, put up billboards and do all your media pitching this entire semester, but that's humanly impossible for this group of 4. So instead, guiding that client expectation and also that student expectation, because sometimes the student expectations are just as lofty, saying, oh, we can do all of that. Sure. Yeah. We'll build you out a whole website by the end of the semester, and we'll have it up and running and everything will be great. And so being that go-between as the professor, between that the client expectations and student expectations is going to be important. The end of each of the different letters here in P.A.C.E, I kind of put tools and tricks for the classroom, things that I've noted that are super fabulous as far as each of these different things. And I think for prioritizing, sometimes it's just getting the right tools in front of the students. We use Slack. A lot of our students use Slack as far as, and we have a student organization, PRSSA, if you guys are familiar with that, similar to AMA for marketing. But it brings that student group together. They have a student-run firm that does a lot of client-based work, and that Slack, groups them in together as teams, and I sit on those different teams. But then I also can kind of track what's happening, who's responsible for things. I call them love taps when someone's not pulling their weight or someone's kind of dropped the ball on something. So again, prioritizing, hey, this is the most important part, and other people can't move until you do your part. So, and I can see that all happening on Slack. So I really like that. We've used Project Manager before. I love the Gantt charts, and I love the stuff. It also has a free trial that is 30 days. So I usually use it in one of my classes once we start getting to that point, and then the 30 days it's over, and then I think it costs around $15 a person, and then we want out at that point. But it's a nice tool, especially for them to just get an understanding of how easy that can be, and seeing the timing of things and how that all lines up. If you've ever used Evernote, that's another wonderful tool to kind of keep everyone together in the same space. I put up here the different levels, but there's a free, but even the $7.99 a month, we're a smaller school. So like our firm, from the money that we get from the clients, we can afford some of those things and make sure that they have the premium version that kind of keeps everyone together as well. But all three of these, and these are not exhaustive, but these are some of the ones that we've used at Northern that really work for us. And so would recommend in setting those priorities and who's doing what and management, those types of things, 3 great resources for you to take back. The A stands for attest. And, conversations can be super difficult, especially when the student just doesn't have an understanding of the industry, or they don't have an understanding of how business really works every day. Maybe they haven't had an internship, or they haven't worked for anyone yet. And so they're just getting this all out of a textbook. So attesting to like, yes, we can do this. Yes, this can happen. And what happens is when you kind of, and I put this as the last point, like rallying behind what is determined as the best plan, as the advisor or the faculty member, you're usually that cheerleader person, right? Like, get on the bus, we're gonna go, and believe in that fruitfulness of, yes, this plan can work. And so part of that happens in taking time to clarify and answering questions that sometimes are more difficult for students to understand or comprehend, because they just haven't had the experience that you may have. And what happens is when we let that go too long, or when the students try to fix it themselves and we're not involved enough to know that these problems are happening, we risk burnout, right? I have a little video that I show in class, and I want to show it today. It's only 5 minutes long, so hopefully it won't be too long. But it's great as far as not only burnout for us as professors, because you think of all the things that we have on our plates, but also for the students, because I don't think they really fully understand. Most of our students in PR especially are those A-type go-getter, always on, constantly striving for perfection students. And so the risk of burnout is real. And I know that just from, I remember my provost telling me the first year, like, I'm more concerned about burnout for you than I am anything else. Like the stuff you're doing is great, but you can't keep that up. And as an A-type personality, I'm like, oh, you challenged me. Like, watch this. Like, so, but those are long. So speeding up, like going faster just to get through, is not always helpful in a campaign because they're just trying to get it done, just to get it done. And then you lose sight of some of those little nitty gritty details that you need in order to keep it strong. From the student perspective, when they don't hear back from the client, sometimes they don't know what to do. And that's a conversation that needs to be had. Like, okay, you've reached out to this client. Did you follow up? Like, okay, you left a voicemail or you sent an email, but did you follow up or did you just let it sit there? And now it's 2 weeks later into the semester and they have no idea what they're doing, or they're waiting on that response because they haven't moved forward in anything else. Or sometimes the plan stalls and they just let it go. Like, well, they didn't do that, so we've been sitting here. You know, if you're not checking on them, if you're not prioritizing that group as something that you should be doing, or that client, you know, they just let it go. And so everything else seems to be also due at the end of the semester. So making mini deadlines as a professor kind of helps them stay in check to stuff. And sometimes it's not even graded for like a hardcore grade, like a numerical grade. It's a yes, no, pass, fail kind of thing. And sometimes those mini deadlines will help you detect and help the students detect whether they're keeping that flow, keeping going. So burnout's real for all of us. How can we help with this? And I will, you'll watch the video here in a second, but they definitely play off our enthusiasm. So the client selection is important, which is why I try to get that buy-in from the students. But also, you know, if you come in and you're like, oh, you have that client, and you're really kind of like, oh, brother, and they'll play off that, right? They really get excited when you get excited. And so I highly recommend that you get clients that you have good rapport with, or you have good relationships with, and you can have build off that enthusiasm with your students. So I'm going to play this. Hopefully you can hear it. Someone jump on the chat if you can't.
So I'm really enthused that we're finally starting. I'm a human resources professional. And in my career, I have been directly involved in 9,000 to 10,000 termination meetings. Meetings where people say it's one of the top 4 emotional events of their life. Meetings where they are pulled aside and told they are no longer on the team and their world changes. As a part of being right there when that happened, I really studied, why was this being done to this particular person? Why was this person chosen? And if you boiled it all down, burnout was a big part of it. Burnout, which they would have had a voice in fixing if they knew how to do it. Burnout where perhaps the manager had blown past some tripwires and not provided them with resources, had not provided them with feedback, had not provided them with support. And the employee should have been empowered to ask. And for you to understand how this has become a much bigger issue, we have to go back some decades. When we came out of World War II, we were still, North America, we were still in lifetime employment strategies where you would enter employment with a monolithic organization. You would hand them the keys to your career. The deal is they would drive, they would tell you what to do. And as long as you followed orders, you'd get a gold watch and a pension check at the end. Mid-'80s, the world significantly shifted with, for the first time, massive layoffs in North American manufacturing. This was different. In those layoffs, organizations came out and said, you are now driving, here's the keys, you go drive your career. Good news, you now had the power to decide where you went. Bad news, you now were in charge of your own life. And there had not been a lot of structure in how to do that. So let's fast forward to the modern world. If we have a manager who is moving pretty quickly, deadlines are tight, organization structure is flat, lots of reports, the manager is thinking, if I'm a noble leader, I can demonstrate the kind of behaviors, but I don't have the time to come back and nurture every person. Well, high performers really need feedback. They desire it. And at the same time, the manager is feeling, I don't need to spend time with my high performers. They're doing a great job. So the high performer essentially works in a feedback vacuum. Also understand, they may not have been mentored. They may not have been part of an apprenticeship program. It's assumed they know how to ask for feedback. That's a false assumption. They may not know. The manager doesn't have the right cues. The manager may not give feedback, and the skill build that needs to happen of how good communication is supposed to happen between people is skipped over. Multiply on this that many modern managers are introverted in their style, which means they are not out from behind their desks. We're interacting electronically and little cues and an emoji. It's not as powerful as a routine face-to-face chat with a boss they respect. With that missing, the feedback loop is broken. And we have a group of people where if one person gets caught in a burnout cycle and becomes cynical, becomes a drag on everyone else, it kind of becomes a death cycle for that person's career at that location. What's needed? A manager who's aware of the warning signs of burnout and who's also aware that they have a role in not giving just open happy talk, but it's such a different world where many people learned one size fits all. And now it's one size fits one, where a good leader knows each of their people, knows what the warning signs are if burnout starts to occur, and can then apply the proper remedy for that person's communication style, for that person's thinking style, because it's really going to vary from person to person. So I'm really enthused that we're finally starting to look at burnout as an issue, because untreated, burnout can kill a career. And with some awareness, high quality people can be turned around and brought back from the brink in time to get them back to high performance in a reasonable period of time without them having to be a part of a termination meeting and a clean sheet of paper and a restart somewhere else. Hello, I'm Carl Ulrichs. I'm a human resource.
Hopefully, put my video back on here. Hopefully that was helpful. I think sometimes for the students to hear that, especially when they think they're the team leader, right? Or they want to manage someday, or they want to be part of that. Burnout's so real in so many, particularly, like I said, for those PR kids. So I feel like that's a good video, and I've seen it a million times, but I still, it still resonates every time. It's like this little reminder to myself of like, okay, burnout's real. So if you see yourself getting some of these triggers, you need to talk to somebody or figure out, not get to that termination spot, right? And I think that goes true for the students as well, even within group projects, not checking out and keeping part of that team. C in the PACE models for change. And if nothing else, 2020 taught us that we have to be able to pivot. So I think we're more adept to that, to this is more so than when we came up with it before, but pivoting that mid-planning process can trigger mass panic, especially with students who, again, they built the strategy, they built that perfect plan, and they want to adhere by it. And now, oh my gosh, this major thing has happened. How are you going to deal with those nervous or anxious team members that this has turned their world upside down? This is not who they are, and this is not how they like to proceed. So this is part of life, right? So How are you going to do that as a student, and how as a professor, how are you going to interact and make sure that that's a smooth transition if it has to change? Because again, it's part of life. These are things that are going to happen when they go out for their internships or they go out for those first jobs. So how are they going to be able to handle that? And again, just giving a little bit of structure and a little bit of this is normal and a little bit of instruction on how to deal with that can go miles upon miles and help with not only the project, but also with their career trajectory as far as learning how to adapt with these skills. So any strategic plan that you build has to be able to evolve through that planning process, because again, things happen whether we want them to or not. And from a student perspective, most don't like this, right? I thought this was a clever a clever little graphic here, because I feel like this, I think my students would wear this button. Change is good. You go first, right? They think, they know that it happens. They know they have to be involved with that. But they don't like it, particularly those A-type students that, you know, everything is done perfectly. They usually take on the project themselves because they want that A and they're striving for that A. And now this is part of their grade and now everything's changing. And, you know, they're the kid that this wasn't in the syllabus and you said you weren't going to grade this or whatever it might be. They just start to freak out. So this is something that's really tough to teach, right? How do we teach change? But again, when they're able to adapt to it and do it and put it on their resume, that's something, that's a talking point that employers are looking for, that this kid, you know, is adaptable and is able to change. And, you know, this is how they've been through it and this is how they did. And so it's something great that they can put on their resumes as well. I just put this up here. This is from HubSpot, and it's totally, these 5 points are totally lifted from their website, but it's one of the best articles that I've read as far as, I feel like in PR in particular, we're always pivoting in a rush. Like it's always done this, and this leads into the PACE model, right? Like we have to slow down. This is not a sprint, but things have to change quickly. So how do you do that in a strategic way? So knowing when you have to pivot. There's some people that will beat that dead horse until, you know, it's been dead for days, but they're still beating it because they're like, oh my goodness, like it's got to work. It's got to come back to life. This has got to happen. This is the only thing we have. And so knowing when it's time to throw in the towel and move and pivot is critical. And then putting your audience first. Many times students in particular want to make change because it's more convenient to them. And it's not necessarily because it's best for the client or best for the audience. In this case, many times you're working, the client might not even be the audience, but your target audience that you're trying to reach, what's in their best interest. So putting their best interest first, changing your content lens. And that's incredibly difficult, especially when we talk about sticking to a brand or having, you know, that, you know, this is the lens that we're going to look through it. And this is the content that we want. But if it's not resonating and it's not working, then we have to be able to pivot within that. We have to be able to change. Connecting with other colleagues. In this case, it could be other peers, but putting them in contact with people that have been there and done that. Many times I'll bring in a person from a firm that, a public relations firm that have to do these quick pivots in a rush. And, you know, they've had this client for years and this is how the client's always done it. But now this has happened and they had to change very quickly. And whether it worked out for them or not, they're attesting to, which goes back to my A, right? They're attesting to this works. Like sometimes you have to do this. So connecting them and seeing that this is normal and giving ideas and sharing those ideas is important. And then don't overestimate your pivot, meaning sometimes just slight changes will make all the difference, right? And people think they have to turn the whole apple cart, and that's not always true. Sometimes we can just make small little changes within our campaign, and knowing, again, putting that audience first and knowing when's the best time to change and who's for the best interest it is to do that change. The last part of the PACE model then is educate, the E, and just being exposed to this knowledge. It's worth the time to read what others have done and what worked and what didn't. And that's why, again, I emphasize that they have to be through, in our curriculum, they have to be through that research class and research methods to understand how to do research, because that's going to be the first part of this, building the strategy. And that's education, right? For them, it's worth their time to see how other people have implemented their campaigns, what worked, what didn't, and replicating those things, not exactly, because everything is different. Every campaign is different. Even if you're running the same campaign for the same client, it's a different time, it's a different world. So we talk about that, but also it's worth the time to kind of find out what, the last time this happened, this gives us benchmarks for our evaluation portion as well, to measure apples to apples. A big part of life in general is learning from each other. Of course, you're all educators, so you all know that. But taking the time to educate, those PR professionals can analyze that situation, think about what can or should be done, what should be implemented, how should it be implemented based on these others that have done similar things, and determine how those results can be measured. From a student perspective, they're already on overload information, right? They've got 5 or 6 classes they're already attending in one day sometimes, or in a week, and they have information overloaded at all times. So they need to be taught, like, for this is the best place to go. You should look here. Letting them know about professional development opportunities for them and what's best. So, and sometimes if you as a professor can integrate those best practices, those professional development opportunities for them into the course, that's a double bonus, right? So I'm not attesting to being great at any of this, but I try to implement within our strategies, social media strategies class. I try to implement, they have to get their Google Analytics certificate while they're in there. And I know I could tell them until I'm blue in the face that they should go do it. But unless I put it into the curriculum and give them 100 points for just doing it and getting through the whole process and having a certificate in hand, they're not going to do it. They're not going to devote the time to it because they're already overloaded with everything else they've got going on. So the more you can, funnel that information, what you think will be best for their professional development, the more you can do that, again, pacing them, because the more knowledge they have on those types of things, the more they can build that into their campaigns and strategize with best practices of, this has been done, or I've seen this work out. This has been done in industry. This is how it worked. So I want to be knowledgeable in this area too. And then, of course, measurements is key to knowing whether or not we were successful. So we have to do that measurement portion at the end. And in order to do that, we have to have some knowledge of, what we're measuring. And that goes back to the research portion, but having the resources to look in the right places. The last part here, I think this is one of my last slides, but I did want to give you, this is how in our textbook, we give a class activity of how to implement that PACE model into the actual classroom. And the tortoise and the hare, again, the tortoise pacing themselves, the hare just wants to they risk burnout by going too fast and flying through the whole process. But start by spending some time explaining how PACE works. So again, kind of just what we've done today. And by the way, if any of you use the textbook, Jamie and I are more than willing, if you need a guest speaker, if you want us to come in and talk to, in particular the PACE model, since this is something that we devised, if that's something that you're interested in, we're more than happy to come and talk and explain how that PACE model works. And one of those, really diving into when one of those key characteristics are bypassed. So you skip through prioritizing, you just do the ACE part, right? Because you want to ace this class, so you're skipping the P. When that's overlooked, how can not prioritizing just totally unravel your entire campaign strategy? So there's plenty of examples, right? Or evaluate some case studies that are out there and see if students can identify in those case studies, kind of which parts of that campaign may have moved too fast. They didn't pace themselves, right? Or one of those key components of pacing or prioritizing and or attesting or changing or educating, what one of those key components would have benefited from actually having that steady pace instead of just kind of blowing through it. So again, that's something that we're willing to come in and work with you. If you're using that text and you want additional information, we're also trying to get, many of you probably use Stu Kent's text, and maybe not the PR, but just any of them, and they have those expert sessions, and we're working to expand some of those in the PR book specifically. But the one expert session is in this chapter is with Joe Clarkson, who works for Taylor Public Relations down in North Carolina, and he speaks to like building strategy for a campaign and what those steps are. And he doesn't speak specifically to strategy, but he talks through the whole process from developing goals and objectives, strategies, tactics, to the budget and the measurement and the timelines, and how all that interweaves together to build a strong campaign. How am I doing on time? Ooh, 4 minutes. All right. So I think, yeah, many thanks for showing up. I guess at this time, I'll take some questions. We have about 4 or 5 minutes to take some questions on this. This is my email and also my Twitter handle. Is actually better. I know I do social, but I'm way better at responding to email because I let it sit there with a little flag until I respond than Twitter. But happy to connect, and yeah, happy to answer any questions that you guys might have today that I can help with. And in the meantime, I will end my show and put the link to the video.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's always great to hear and to see your passion for this model. I am one of the people that's actually helping with getting those expert sessions for the PR principles textbook, and it is a great resource for students to have to see that industry or academic experience that people are going through. But would love to hear any questions if you guys have it. I love that she also opened it up, that it's a model that can be used in any classroom, whether it's PR or not, but it's good to pace yourself, whether you're an athlete or whether you're in a class. I know as a former student that is definitely, it was great to see those student perspectives that you had and to be reminded of those. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, I know that there were a few comments about kind of what people do for themselves to kind of help pace, but honestly, it was very straight to the point. I think it was great. But let me know if you have any questions, and she shared that link in the chat so you can see that video. Yeah. Besides that, it's been great. I love having people here, especially I know it's summer for some of you, so thanks for coming and spending your day at ProfCon. And it's a wonderful experience to see how many people. This is my first ProfCon, so it's wonderful to see people showing up and participating, and we really appreciate it. I'm sharing another link in the chat for our next event that's coming up, which is our final event of our ProfCon, and it's going to be our keynote speaker, Kristen, and she's going to be speaking about COVID and client-based projects and how she's able to kind of use it to her advantage in classrooms. But I think it's absolutely wonderful that we were able to have you today, Aggie, and I call her Aggie, but Alisa.
It's fine.
But we're grateful, and yeah, I see comments that excellent session. So thank you for your time today, and thank you for all those that attended. We'll be closing up if we don't have any questions, but hopefully you guys will enjoy this last part of ProfCon, and we'll be able to see you at either this product launch that's coming up or at one of our future events, and hopefully at ProfCon in person one day. But awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Everyone have a good day. I'll see you at Kristen's session.